So a little bit about me in terms of an introduction and also to the set of talks. So I'm Ian Durbin, I'm a visiting professor at UCL. I've been involved in the MEng course for the last 8 or so years, and my role is industry liaison, and I'm particularly interested in getting industry engaged with the course to ensure that the course is as good as it should be. So I am a consulting engineer. I've actually retired. I've 35 years in the industry, where I was a practicing engineer as well as a senior leader, and I think I've got some wisdom. I mean, I'm not just sort of being big-headed. I think anybody who's had a 35-year career has some wisdom in that career. And I can't help thinking to myself, how can we capture that wisdom and actually provide that back to the next generation, the future of the industry? Because I think that I'm sort of 100% convinced that it must actually be beneficial to you to receive that wisdom as well as for me to get it. And of course, it's not just me, it's all the people in the industry who've got some learnt experience in a career of 35 plus years. So architects, engineers, quantity surveyors. So if we can somehow or other find a vehicle to bring all that together and then try and deliver that back to you, that is the purpose of this series of talks. So who have you got talking? Well, I opened up last week giving an overview about my 35-year career and what sort of things that I learnt along the way that actually made me effective. And I think my bugbear and my slight worry about a sort of a very academic course like this one is that you can be taught all the knowledge, but actually the secret sauce, the magic, is when you apply the knowledge to get an outcome. You can sit in the room and say, I know what you need to do, but actually the hard bit is to harness that and get a result for the benefit of a client, for yourself, for your organisation, or for the planet. We've obviously got Joe today, and I'll come back and introduce Joe in a minute, but we've also got Anna, who is an architect who's transferred her career to engineer. That's quite useful. She's talking next week. We've got Ruth, who's a lighting designer and a day lighting specialist. And then finally we've got an old friend of mine, Matt, who is arguably one of the most radical MEP engineers or senior leaders in the industry that I can think of. Has got lots of sort of really interesting ideas about how we need to change the industry for it to be better. So I would urge everybody to come along and attend these talks. There's a lot of wisdom, a one-off opportunity here to get this wisdom into your minds, so I'd urge you to come along. So, as I say, just to recap, we're about providing real-world experience to you to supplement your academic world experience, and absolutely to encourage you to join the construction industry or built environment industry, which I think has been fantastic. I would think Joe and I would both agree that it's been an amazing industry for us, and we want you to be part of it. And then, as I say, to be effective as possible as soon as you can, because that's what this industry needs. And how we're going to do that by having a whole set of talks, as I've just described. So a little bit about Joe. So I've known Joe for, I was thinking this on the train, Joe. I think it was probably 2006 that we started to work together.
It would have been about that, yeah.
Yeah, so almost 20 years. And I think you've had a 25-year career, but it's probably a bit longer than that. 30 years now, probably, is it?
Not yet.
Not yet? Oh, 25 years. I've got it right first time. And to spare Joe's blushes, I actually think that of all of the QSs I've worked with in my career, Joe he's the best. And that's because he's got a really deep knowledge of how finance works. Cost, budgets, finance, cost plans, money, essentially. And as I said in my talk last week, one of the sort of key ingredients to a successful career is understanding how all of that works. Because if you're a designer, it's very easy if you want to design a gold-plated facade, as a stupid example, and you put all your effort into a wonderful design like that. At the end of the day, if the client can't afford it, it's not going to be built. And understanding that sweet spot between design and cost is a key thing, and Joe has that in spades, so he's got a lot of wisdom to pass on. And also, Joe, I think, is a very practical, hands-on guy who understands how buildings are put together. So he marries those two sort of those two bits of his career together very well, and he's also very carbon aware. And again, to spare his blushes, I think Joe and the organisation that he leads, CAST, is one of a small group of people in this industry that's actually replumbing it or transitioning it to be much better for tomorrow rather than it is today. So, significant wisdom on offer. As I say, questions throughout or questions at the end. And that's me done. I'll pass over to Joe. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'll sit in the audience if I can find a seat.
So I'll start with a little bit about me. So I suppose my journey through into construction, into the industry that, as Ian said, that we love, have had a great time with. So I started off as a ground worker from an Irish background. My dad had a groundworks business. I was on site at probably 5 years old. So from a health and safety point of view, it was a different world back then. But that probably fed my love or intrigue into what we're doing. Not exactly sure how I ended up doing QSing, but that was the degree that I chose at university. So I went to Kingston Uni. I did a year out from Kingston at a company that was then called EC Harris, which was, when I joined, about 700 people. That then evolved over time. So I did my year out, went back to uni, and then came back full time, and I transitioned to be an equity partner at EC Harris, which was a partnership business. We then sold the business in 2011, at which point we were about 2,500–3,000 people. So also interesting from a careers point of view to understand different types of businesses. So lots of big behemoth businesses now. We sold EC Harris to Arcadis, which is a big Dutch engineering company. I stayed there for another 4 years and then realised that being one of 30,000 people, I think by the time I left, wasn't what I wanted. So I, instead of moaning about it and rebelling against the business, I decided to go and stop moaning and go and do it myself. And I think that in itself is an interesting thing that I've found. There's no right or wrong in people's careers in terms of actually what you want to do. Some big businesses are great. Some people like being part of a big business. They get reward, they get the benefit of that. Other people like being part of a small organisation. So we're circa 100 people delivering cost and project management. Certainly from my point of view, I get more reward from being closer to the problems, being closer to the challenging bit of our industry and helping clients sort things out. So as you're an engineering course, I thought Ian said they probably won't understand what a QS does or a project manager. So I thought we'd start with trying to clarify that. So from as a quantity surveyor, or more commonly now what we are called as cost managers or commercial managers, our role is effectively managing all the financial aspects of a project and working out how we come up with a viable scheme. So in my role, I predominantly work in the residential sector. I can pretty much, so therefore the environment that we work in is numbers led. As in, if our jobs aren't going to make a profit, the client's not going to buy the site, they're not going to build the building, they're not going to sell the flats or rent the flats out more increasingly, and therefore the job just doesn't happen. Whereas a lot of the work I used to do with Ian when we first worked together at Oxford University, a lot of it was big money that was given by donors, and therefore there was less rigour around whether it financially stacked up, because if it was going to solve cancer, or it was going to solve various different things that the university was looking to try and do, the money was invested. The residential world, the private sector world, is a bit more hard and fast as to financially, if it doesn't work, it's not happening.
Sorry, Joe, do you mind if I ask
Yep.
some questions along the way as they pop into my mind rather than waiting at the end?
Yeah.
It's interesting to know, one of the things that I think students don't understand is the time scale and the complexity before you actually do anything, before actually anything ever gets built.
Yeah.
Like I said last week, that we were talking about this room, and I said, you have to get into your mind that everything about this room would have been designed years before it was built.
Yeah.
And there's very little room to say, well, actually, we didn't really like that door now, and could we make that a wall? It's all got to be designed ahead of the game. And what you're saying, I think what you're saying, is that from a QSing point of view, arguably you're the most important person talking to a developer. Are you, in terms of, like, it wouldn't even get started, the design wouldn't even start unless the deal worked. Is that right, or have I got that bit wrong?
So in a lot of instances, yeah. So we get involved quite often before a client's even bought a site. So we are a real white blank piece of paper. Quite often I'll get a phone call that will say, from one of our established developers, I'm looking to build a 20-storey building, it's 200 units, it's in this location, how much is it going to cost? So that is a very regular conversation, right, where you have to work it through in your mind. You know, broadly, what do you think it's going to be? Tell them a number, and they go, right, okay, I'm either going to buy that. That's either works or it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, then it's a very short conversation. If it does work, then you go on to putting some parameters to it, as to say, right, okay, well, actually, how could it work? They buy the site, and then we're off. We get a job. And
it works because he is buying the site for 100 million. He needs to make 10 million profit, so he has to build it for 90 million. Broadly, is that the way it works? So
in the old world, it used to be generally a third. So what you paid for the land, what you paid to develop the land, and then the last third was your profit.
Right.
The world has changed quite a bit, so that last third is definitely less than a third now.
Yeah.
And the land bit has probably shrunk a bit, and the build bit has got more expensive. So trying to balance that equation, where the only thing I can guarantee when I go and see a client about a project is, if I go and deliver the news and they're happy, one of us is wrong, because either they've underestimated what they thought it should be, or overestimated, or I've underestimated it, because viability is really challenging at the moment. Everyone's aware of the cost of living crisis. Interest rates have a direct impact on our projects. Everything on a macro level, on a global level, influences the jobs that we work on. If I take it back to 2022, the Ukraine war, I never knew the cost of gas had so much of an impact on the cost of glazing. But when you're sat there with people daily telling you, if you don't buy this today, it will have gone up by tomorrow because the cost of gas is going up, and all the glass, who knew that so much of construction materials were made in Ukraine? They've got the biggest glass manufacturing facilities in the world.
Really? I didn't know that.
Insulation, everything came out of there.
Right.
And all of a sudden, that as a supply chain was stopped. So understanding all of those things that feed into what is a small project here, going back to your point of most of the jobs that we do, an average job is about 6 years, from probably first phone call to handing over the keys. And of that, a typically sized job would be about 2 years or so on site, 2 or 3 years on site. The rest of it is getting to site. So if you think about it from a client's point of view, they've got to spend an awful lot of money. The first part is blank piece of paper to getting planning permission, which they're doing at their cost because they don't know they're going to get planning permission, and they only crystallise the value of a scheme when they get planning permission. Prior to that, it was just a dream. It was someone's ambition that I could get 500 units on this site. Until the planners agree to it, you've got nothing. And you can't go and get funding for that from the bank because no bank's going to fund a dream. When you've got planning permission, you can then go and get funding off the back of that to pay for the next tranche, which is, can you get a contractor to go and deliver it for the number that we've said they can do it? So our role is to help them from blank piece of paper, help shape the design team. Some of the work that we've historically done with Ian is around, we'll give a number, architect will turn up and they'll say, forget about that number, here's what we're drawing, and this is amazing. And then we say, computer says no, it's too expensive, doesn't work. I'll never forget the most interesting scheme that Ian and I worked on was with a company called Herzog and de Muren. They were a architect, and we used to have to fly out every week to their office in Basel for design team meetings. And the first meeting we went to, they're telling us all these amazing schemes they work on around the world. They had 10 schemes on at any one point in time. They only worked for clients who had enough money to pay them. And Ian said to the guy, who I think he was setting him up for me, was, if you go and you design a building in response to the brief that the clients asked you to design, what happens if the client can't afford it and it doesn't meet the brief? You know, you've created this piece of art, what happens? And the guy looked at us, so that's never happened before. They just changed the brief. They go and get more money, which was, you know, from our point of view, pretty phenomenal. That, particularly as we were working for Oxford University at the time, and they weren't getting any more money.
No.
It was, you have to drive it to that. So part of that is because we know that the only way that we as a business make money is if the job moves forward. We have to corral the design team into, actually, you can draw whatever you want, but you'll keep redrawing it until it gets to something that's deliverable, and therefore that's what we should focus on. So we can have lots of arguments, or we can galvanise around what works. So I suppose one of my lessons has been that, you know, actually teamwork and collaboration amongst the design team is the secret to success of a scheme. Now, that's not to say that we haven't worked on lots of projects that have been very adversarial, because our industry has got, it is quite litigious, it is quite aggressive at times, people are under a lot of pressure. But a lot of that comes from, if you set it up right in the first place for success, then it should be well delivered. So our role spans from the cost side of things, procuring the right contractor and the design team, and turning theory into reality, getting a contractor into contract. So we're heavily involved in drafting the contract. Lawyers get paid 10 times more than we do, yet we do all of the hard work in terms of this is the design, these are the things we should really be worried about, these are the risks. And get it into contract, and then we manage that through to handing over the keys. As a project manager, which is the other side of my business, project managers didn't exist in construction 40, 50 years ago. It was a role that didn't exist. Project managers have come from, because historically architects were the lead designer on a project. The architect would coordinate a structural engineer, an MEP services engineer, and work with a QS, and that would basically be your team, quite a small number of disciplines. What's happened to the industry over the last 30, 40 years is it's become quite splintered. So architects don't want that management role, so they've handed that over, and what's emerged have been project managers, whose role is to, again, quite often we'll get involved at a blank piece of paper, shape the brief, try and extract from the client, right, what is it you really want? Because if you don't tell us now, you're going to go and employ the wrong designer, or we're going to have the wrong budget, or we're going to have all these things, and you're going to work it out as you go along. But the less we define it now, the longer it's going to take to get into planning, because we're making it up as we go along. So as project managers, it's about bringing structure and process to it. But again, it's about collaboration. It's about, we have jobs where as project managers, it's pretty adversarial, it's argumentative between contractors and design team. Whereas our best jobs are the ones where actually everyone galvanises around the problem, because there are problems. We work in a problem-solving industry. We build flats, which arguably people will say, well, how hard can that be? There's loads of flats been built before. You get one right, and you're building a block of 300 of them. Just keep repeating it. Well, I would say residential is probably the hardest product to deliver in the market, because the repetitive nature of it. There's lots of places for people to hide on site, like physically. You try and find an electrician, you go, could be anywhere. So that intensity of doing it consistently makes it quite hard. But the key to good project management is communication. So from our perspective, collaboration, being proactive, trying to get ahead of the problem, because we know there will be problems. That's the bit that I think is the secret sauce to trying to make it work well.
And just so from a graduate point of view, there is a route to entry to QSing and project management.
Yes. So we have.
And are they complementary skills, or are they different skills that just happen to be under the same umbrella of your organisation and lots of organisations like yours? A lot of them are complementary, and a lot of people. So I span probably both. I'm a trained quantity surveyor, but I do a lot of project management on schemes, and that's where we're delivering both. So we do 80% of our work is combined cost and project management. A lot of the time, because we work for financial people and developers who want to push as much, just get it done to us, and it's easier for us to work together in that way. Right.
Similarly, At one point I wanted to be a project manager, so coming up, like doing QSing, but like getting more involved in controlling the project. And somebody once said to me, the best project managers are really good QSs, because if you want to deliver, if you've got to deliver an outcome to a number, you have to manage the client, the design team, and everybody else for your theory to become a reality. If you just let everybody else do whatever they want, then it's going to be carnage, and you're not going to deliver your bit. So similarly, the two project managers that my fellow partners in my business, Lily, she started life as a QS for Gardner and Theobald and moved across to being a project manager. Keith started his life as a QS and moved across to being a project manager. We employ lots of people in our business that were architects, are engineers by background. So what we've come across is lots of people, when they get into practice, they enjoy the administrative side or the delivery side more than they do the design side of things. So therefore we've got quite a mixed bag of peoples and skills and experiences, where you can train as an engineer, for example, and do a conversion course and get a Masters in quantity surveying or project management if that was something you wanted to do. So still hope for you in.
Never say never.
So I thought I'd put this up there because
I have a question before we move on. So when you say that, when you do quantity surveying or something, because does it matter, like different geographies have different systems in place?
Yeah.
Specifically, like things like quantity surveying and everything, they require you to know the market,
Yeah.
what the things are. So if you get trained, like for example, the UK, you understand how the QS sort of world works here.
Yeah.
Would your skills be transferable? For example, they move to Americas or somewhere else.
So
How does that play out?
yeah, so most of the world don't have quantity surveyors. UK, it's relatively unique to the UK. There is exists in that the role has travelled, but so historically America never had quantity surveyors. It had, but the model over in America is quite different. So a lot of American schemes are delivered by general contractors, who are a bit of everything. So they manage a bit of the cost. They might have architects and design team internally. So it's a very different concept. In Europe, they have what they call cost engineers, which is much more granular. We design, you measure and price it. So more estimating rather than our role. What we find is we try and influence the design so that when it's drawn, it aligns to the budget, as opposed to historically, engineer would draw something, we would say that's too expensive, redraw it, and that iterative process would go on and on and on, where until we try and get to a number that works. So it is different around the world, but I think the UK it's more of a proactive role. In lots of other parts of Europe, it's more of a reactive role.
Yeah, I like the phrase cost manager rather than a quantity surveyor in a way, because it's a bit more accurate in terms of what you actually do, isn't it?
Yeah, and also some of the stuff will go on to around technologies. We don't actually measure that much these days.
Yeah. You don't guess it.
I always guess it. I'm just getting better at getting it right. But no, I mean a lot of it is computer-aided design. What was a world of lots of people measuring drawings that came from big drawing offices of architects and engineers. Everything's done in technology now, so people can measure things in half the time, a fraction of the time that they could 20, 30 years ago.
And by measure you mean literally how many windows, how big is each window, how many toilet pans, how many light switches, that sort of thing. Yeah. Okay.
So kind of one of the things that's always stood me in good stead in my career is magnifying glass on the left is what we see as kind of business as usual. And I do think in the industry today there's a lot of people doing the bare minimum. There's a lot of people that are just doing enough to get through. So we've inherited quite a lot of jobs from clients where, as I said, nothing stacks up financially. So clients coming to us saying, someone's given me these numbers, can you have a look? And you go, and in many instances they're too high or they're too low. And if you're a client trying to move forward a scheme, trying to get funders from money from a bank and all these things, if you haven't got robust advice, it's really difficult. So a lot of what we find is that even what we would consider the basics in terms of benchmarking and setting up systems for projects and stuff like that, people aren't doing the basics right. But on the right hand side, we see that as being all about outputs. So I'm a cost manager, I'm paid to do a cost plan. So what? Yeah, I know that most of the cost plans we produce, when our team come to me and say, I've gone through this, I've spent the last 3 weeks doing it, I've come to this number, can you sign it off? And I go, it's wrong. And they say, how do you know? You haven't even looked at the drawings. I'm like, well, it can't be that number, because if I look at it relative to all the other jobs we're doing, or it might well be right, but if we put that number in front of the client, no one's going to have a job, because it's £10 million too high. What we need to do is we need to say, right, okay, we've done this, it's going to cost you this, but don't worry, we've got a route to getting to a more viable scheme, which for us is about outcomes. So outcomes for us are jobs that keep moving forward. So that's where we want to think about, engaging the supply chain early. We want to think about, what is the product that we're designing. A lot of the time we look at schemes where architects and engineers have over-designed buildings, which people might say, well, you're just a QS, you're here to measure and add things up. Yeah, but we probably know as much about what a high-end residential scheme should look like as anybody else. And actually, you don't need to have marble everywhere. What you need to have is relative finishes to the value that you're looking to achieve. So there is no point in having marble everywhere in bathrooms in a scheme that's only going to achieve £1,000 a square foot sales value. If you were going to get £2,500 a square foot sales value, that makes sense. So our approach is to try and be proactive, trying to foresee the inevitable, which is, I've had enough clients shout at me telling me that's wrong to know that I've got two choices. I either go as a glutton for punishment to get shouted at again, or say, there's no point in me showing you what the answer is, this is what you've got to do, these are the routes forward. This is how you make something happen.
So you kind of already have a range to work with even before you start. So obviously that is determined by previous client conversations, but also like,
but also
how much is it driven by like, okay, this is it, and in the beginning stages, okay, this is your target, you have to kind of keep it in this.
Yeah, so for example, if I've told a client that, so let's take a residential scheme around here that would probably cost about £350 a square metre to build. Now, I know that because we do schemes like that all the time. So if it's costing significantly more or less, it's wrong.
Yep.
Either the design's wrong, or we've missed something, or something's fundamentally wrong, because we benchmark our projects. We use data all the time to understand, right, what are we paying for stuff, what should it cost, and how do we narrow that down. So when somebody comes to me, one of my guys, and says, right, I've worked really hard for the last 3 weeks, we've measured this, we've gone out and checked all these prices and checked the design and so on, it's £400 a square metre, a square foot, and we go, well, that's great, you've done an awful lot of good work there, but it's come to the wrong answer. What are we going to do to get it back into the right answer? So we apply our knowledge, our insights to say, if it's not there, it should be there. So either, for us, a lot of it is design's wrong. So, we focus very much on design metrics. So wall to floor ratio. So a perfect scheme should have half a square metre of wall for every square metre of floor that's delivered.
Okay.
Net to gross. So how efficient the bit that adds value in terms of the apartments are outside of the circulation spaces.
So for different building types, you have these rules of thumb. You can really kind of very high level check that, okay, this is going in wrong direction, either floor to wall ratio.
Yeah, I was going to ask the same sort of thing, same question but in a different way, because I think that you can offer that as long as you've got deep knowledge of your sector. Yeah.
So we can, and that's why. So we are residential experts. When I worked with Ian originally, I was a labs expert. Metrics are completely different. The drivers are completely different. But again, you are in a world where you have to adapt. You have to have knowledge. Otherwise, if I look at our organisation, 100 people, and we're paid to do quite a lot of work, but what clients really value is that trusted insight. That I've got a problem. How are we going to get our way out of it? And that's the bit that, yes, experience has got me to where I am, But increasingly, that's where technology and data is going to accelerate people through the careers. They're not going to have the 25 years of experience that I've had to know what I've had, because they'll have it at the push of a button.
So in simple terms, the left-hand side, my left-hand side, the output focus is the sort of direction of travel is you can get that answer from a computer.
Yeah.
My right-hand side is about what you do with that story and how you make. So it's a little bit like my effectiveness thing.
Yeah.
There's no point in being in the room shouting, saying you need to do this. Actually, what you've got to do is actually deliver it.
Yeah, and this is the bit that, so we've just taken on 4 graduates starting in September, and we sit down for all of them, we have coffee with everyone that starts, and they get a chance to talk to us about our careers and what we do and what the business does. And I was chatting to Ian earlier about a girl I sat down with the other day, and she said, what 1 or 2 things would you say to me from your career that I should focus on going forward? And I said, it's quite an interesting question because I hadn't been asked it before, but to think about it from my perspective, the bit that we try and ultimately drive is proactivity. So be proactive, whether that's hungry to learn stuff, hungry to get involved in stuff, hungry to, in a meeting, contribute to it, even if you don't know the answer. Even now, I still put my hand up in meetings, which, considering most of my meetings are with directors of other organisations, contractors, clients, I'll still sit there with a room of 20 people and somebody will say something, typically the M&E guys, who say a load of complicated stuff, and I'll go, and everyone's nodding, you go. Everyone looks at you like you're an idiot, and you say, that doesn't make any sense to me, explain that to me. And I'll guarantee you 9 times out of 10, person's face the colour will drain from them because they were making it up as they go along, or they're not really clear.
People, no, much cleverer.
Or alternatively, what you'll start to see is the sigh of relief from other people around the room who go, I didn't understand it either.
Why wasn't I brave enough to ask the question? Yeah.
Can you explain it? And when they then go and explain it, like, we don't need that. That's not what we need for this scheme. What we need is that. So having that proactivity, having that confidence, which maybe when I was younger it was naivety, now it's probably more confidence to put your hand up and say, I don't understand. For me, that's a real kind of skill that should exist in everybody because it doesn't require you to go to university. The other side of it is people. We are a people-based industry. As a cost and project manager, I don't draw anything. I'm not a designer. I don't physically lay bricks. We are people. We are a people industry, and jobs only get moved forward by people. Yes, there are lots of other things that go around it, but building relationships, the fact that we've known each other for 20 years, all of these things are what stand people instead to have long-term careers. So
communication.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I was saying, like, in effect, you have almost like, do you control the purse strings in that project in that case?
Yeah, to a large extent, yes. So most of the organisations we work with, they have financial controllers and they have accountants, and they deal with the actual banks and the money side of things. But we are the interface between what happens with the contractor. So we would never let the contractor talk to the money because they just talk a completely different language. And also what a lot of our role is about managing risk. So you talk to a contractor all day long, he'll tell you all the things that are going wrong, or he'll tell you if it's the client's risk. All he'll do is tell you about all these things that are going to go wrong and this is going to go wrong. If it's his risk, he'll tell you everything's perfect, and we know that it's not. But if he told that to the money would probably run away and hide and say, why would I carry on with this job because the contractor's telling me all these things. We sit in the middle going, that's not really a risk. You're going to sort that out. That is a real risk, but it's your risk under the contract. You need to get it sorted and stop moaning to us about it. Similarly, from a finance point of view, they're only interested in the return. So they want, is the job going to finish on time? Is it going to finish to the budget? Everything other than that, it amazes me to this day that people that invest You know, in some of our schemes, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of money, and they have next to no interest or understanding of the construction side of it. But then why should they? They employ people like us and, you know, yourselves in the future that are paid to look after their interests, which makes it quite interesting. So from our point of view, you know, we work across lots of different clients, you know, some out and out funders, so people like Oaktree, through to people like Legal and General, Oxford, in their joint venture, but a real plethora, a mix of people, which, considering again we're a residential focused business, but we work for hoteliers, student guys, build to rent guys, for sale people. Everyone's completely different. The only thing I can categorically say is no two developers are the same, no two developments are the same, and I suppose that's what makes it interesting, because again they're all influenced by people, they're all influenced by their culture, their DNA, and a lot of the time how they're funded and what they're trying to deliver. And with those people we deliver some pretty interesting, impressive schemes, I'd like to think. So you know, one of our major schemes, Earls Court, is, depending on the day of the week, is anywhere between £3 or £4 billion worth of construction, depending on what they're looking to develop when. But that's a major master plan in for planning permission at the moment, and you know, a really interesting scheme where that's going to deliver schools, theatres, residential, commercial, probably logistics, last mile, Amazon type spaces in the basements, complicated rail networks that run underneath the site, in a very congested, Earls Court's pretty dense environment. So really interesting role for us to influence all these moving parts, that when you're on a master plan of that scale, if you get the buildings out by a little bit and it multiplies out across all the buildings, all of a sudden you've got something that doesn't stack up and is no longer viable, which is a little bit like Battersea. So Battersea we've got involved in last year. They're now on phase 4 and 5, having delivered the original power station itself and some of the amazing buildings they've delivered in phase 1, but they've now realised that all the other phases don't stack up commercially. So financially they can't move those jobs forward, because going back to that equation of what they pay for the land, what it costs to build, what they make as a profit, if it doesn't make enough profit, you can't go to the bank with a job that doesn't make enough profit. It's not worth the risk. So we're doing some work with them at the moment to say, actually, this is probably a master plan that's 10 to 15 years old. You just kept adding stuff to what you had before. You need to refresh it, start fresh, and look at some new interesting things. So that approach that we take means that we can get involved in lots of different places. So some of it's blank piece of paper, other pieces are getting involved to unpick some stuff that has come to a grinding halt because of it. But I thought I'd kind of capture, given this is about my experience in the last 25 years and what we talk about in terms of things for you to think about in your career going forward, is this is a diagram we use with our team quite a lot in terms of what we call the sphere of influence. So what we talk about is that technically, everyone that's trained technically, whether a QS or an engineer or an architect, that should become your comfort zone, because you've spent years at university learning it. You then come into practice where you don't necessarily see the outside world. You sit in an office drawing things, designing things. So once you become technically adept at it, it becomes your comfort zone. But then inevitably people want promotion, they want more senior roles, they want to influence. So you have to broaden that sphere of influence, because just being technically good at your job isn't going to make you a director, isn't going to make you an owner of a business, isn't going to give you the opportunity to run a big development or a project. So for us, that's not about, that's a multifaceted skill set that you need to evolve with it. That some of it's internally focused, so how you build confidence in the teams of people around you. So if you're delivering a big job, you can't do it on your own. You need to bring on a team of people. You need to grow their confidence. You need to grow your management styles. You need to understand actually how do you influence the wider business. Equally, externally, you need to build relationships with people where engineers, architects, clients trust you. They might not like what you say. I'm sure there were many a day where I left Ian's office and Ian said nice things about the advice that we'd just given. But as much as he might not have liked it, he trusted that we were probably right. And therefore, if they didn't do something about it, the job wasn't moving forward. So part of that is about, one, earning that trust, but that's earned through a process of experience and delivery. The other side of it is personal interactions. So how do you influence clients? How do you influence people? You know, a lot of what we do is about influencing outcomes through others. I don't physically lay bricks, but I have to get a job built that requires a lot of bricks to be done. And I'm a long way away from the guy laying the bricks in terms of the structure. But we have to influence the contractor, who influences his management team, who influences the subcontractors to get an outcome, which is, again, one of those things that if you want to develop in your career, you can't do everything yourself. Otherwise, you run yourself ragged and you become more effective for a period of time, and then you become less effective because you're doing lots of things badly. So how do you influence people? And then the other side of it is, and maybe this comes back to the nature and nurture piece, is, you know, how do you develop your leadership style? Everybody's different. Everybody has got their own style to use in different types of situations. But ultimately, it's about, to move on, you have to grow that impact. You have to build the trust, inspire people, and that's a word that shouldn't be underestimated, in that if you can't inspire people towards something or to resolve something, then you're really going to struggle to move on. You also have to have an inquisitive mind, so, you know, we've said there, innovative solutions. I think it's fair to say I've made quite a lot of mistakes in my career on projects, and you learn pretty quickly how to get out of a problem when you've got yourself into one. Or I was talking to Ian earlier about a job that we worked on years ago where we had a particularly, we had a project manager who had a very short fuse. So, and every month somebody used to mess up. So whether it was the architect or the engineer or us, and we would get together and we'd say, right, whose mistake this month? How are we going to galvanise around that to find a solution to move things forward? That brought that team together into a real collaborative approach, probably one of the most collaborative jobs I've worked on. Also made that project manager and that client love us, because from their perspective we never made any mistakes, because we sorted them all out amongst ourselves before we moved forward. But it's those sorts of experiences that galvanise teams and bring them together. So I think, you know, one of the key takeaways for me would be, depending on where you want to go in your career, is technical ability will only get you so far. It's how you broaden that out with a broader skill set that will really help to accelerate you through that. So if I was a 22-year-old graduate looking for a job, how and I wanted all of that, how do I go about choosing the right firm that offers that? Are you saying that most organisations would offer that? Because that's sort of like career development. It's a bit more than that, I know, but you know what I mean. Do you do that yourself, or do you have to do that, or does somebody help you do that? I think so. From my perspective, there are notable people in my career that I've met along the way that have really helped bring me on. So I think part of it is lots of people join big organisations because inevitably they've got big HR departments, they've got training processes, they've got all of those things, which are great. But going back to my point around people, it's also a people industry. So if you just technically follow everything you do, that will get you so far. But actually, from my perspective, and what we try and teach people around, is the softer skills, is the bits that are probably a little bit between the training courses, a little bit about people, a little bit about the nuancing. You know, and to some extent, everyone's going to develop their own style, their own approach, their own ability. But, you know, I think big organisations are really good in terms of getting some core training and discipline into your career. We, as our business, we train most of our people from graduate level upwards, because what we found is hiring people that are kind of either postgrads coming out of university, they've got a preconceived idea as to where they are, and actually we have to take them backwards to take them forwards. or more importantly, other people that we take across at a more senior level, what we found in the industry is that a lot of people have been over-promoted and have got themselves to a position whereby they actually haven't assembled the necessary skill set to be, we find it quite a lot at that senior and associate level, where they can do some things really well. But, as I said, we deliver jobs that might be 5 or 6 years long. That's everything from blank piece of paper time to planning to procuring to construction. That's quite a broad skill set that lots of people, if they've moved around every 2 or 3 years, haven't seen a job from cradle to grave. That's increasingly something that we see. When you say to somebody, right, okay, tell me about a job that you've started and finished, lots of people haven't done that. So I think that's the bit where people need to find out what type of organisation is good for them as well. Some people are really suited to big, industrialised, engineering practices, multidisciplinary practices. Others, that works for a while, but then they want to gravitate towards smaller organisations. So one of our USPs is, as an owner, there's 4 owners of our business, there's 11 directors. We're in amongst our team day in, day out. So from their point of view, there's nowhere to hide. There's they can come and speak to us. We can see what they're doing. That's not in a overly trying to micromanage piece, but that's just hearing conversations around the office. Just like I said, the graduates that have just joined us, I've said to them, just be sponges. Overhear what people are talking about. Be inquisitive. Ask questions as to if 2 people are talking about something that's got nothing to do with you, but it sounds interesting. Ask. Because they will increasingly and openly discuss it. Our 3 values are respect, share, learn as a business. And what we consistently find is that when people join us and you talk to them 2 or 3 months in, they always consistently say, this business is very different to where we've worked before. Everybody's super willing to share. Everybody's always happy to help me learn and develop. And ultimately, that's because we've got a high respect for people and what we're trying to do as an organisation. So I also thought I'd share a bit of insight on what we see as the future, which hopefully is relevant for people that are about to enter professional services. So looking back, and I will admit I did nick these slides off one of my colleagues who recently gave a lecture to the CIOB. Our colleague Mark Farmer's had a lot of work to do in the industry around driving change and looking at where skills and modernisation is going. So as you can see from this image, the world's moved a long way in, this is showing kind of 75 years, but those are 2 real images of 75 years ago, big offices, lots of people at lots of desks, crunching through things. Similarly, from our world, a QS environment, 1995, desktop computer, digitizer. I can actually say I started in practice in 2000. That was the first time I started using email. We used to communicate by fax and letter. Text messages didn't exist. Now it's things like that do make me feel really old. But actually, it just shows that in the last 25 years, the industry's moved a lot, and I would say in the last 10 years, it's the pace of change has dramatically upskilled, to the point now that we've got an office that's got very little paper. Everyone's got laptops. Everyone's measuring on the screen. I'm not even sure there is a scale rule in our office, which is quite a step change for what we're about and what the industry's doing. But it's about to change an awful lot more and is changing a lot more. The world of AI, and for somebody who owns a business with 100 people that are professional services focused, there are days when you hear all of these articles around the end of the professions and AI is going to take over everything we do. The simple fact is that's not going to happen. What it is going to do is it's going to change what we do, because we've already seen that in the last 10 years or so. So we know that actually that person ringing me up saying, I want to build this building, it's 200 units, it's 20 stories high, in my mind, I'm kind of going back through all the bits of data that I've got from other things I've done, piecing it together and giving him an answer. I also know that we have a guy internally in our business that's written a chatbot that can go through all of our data and come up with an answer, which he thinks is amazing. And it is amazing. The answer's wrong, but it's got to an answer in a well-structured way. And when we refine our data to be more structured, that's going to be really powerful, because that's going to mean that one of our graduates could answer that phone and give that answer. Now, the bit that's never going to go away, or certainly not going to go away in the short to medium term, is there aren't many of our clients that are going to buy a £100 million site on the basis of what ChatGPT has told them. But what they are going to rely on is somebody like us that's informed by that technology to say, is that the right answer? Can you validate it rather than come up with it in the first place? Why is that? Because I've got PI insurance, they want someone to sue if it goes wrong. So there is a world where that will probably change in the future, but certainly in the near term, that data-driven insights is what we're very focused about as a business. And I think in a world of engineering, that's going to be more and more powerful as we go forward. And for us, it's all about insights. You know, everyone's got data, so what? If you can't derive insights from it, it's just a load of data. So that's where I think AI will change what we and all the industry do. How do I think it will change the landscape of the industry? So, you know, that plethora of things that we talked about there that links back to actually what I said earlier, that historically you built a job with an architect, a structural engineer, a services engineer, maybe a QS and a contractor, pretty small team of organisations. Over the last 50 years, that's become quite splintered, quite fragmented. Architects no longer really design facades. MEP engineers have a lift engineer, an acoustic engineer, you know, tens of people involved in the process. All specialists in their own right, and that's not me being derogatory around the way that the industry's evolved, but it also has got to a position why that's partly the reason why everything's so expensive, because everyone has got their own little specialism and their own margin and their own, you know, that role on top of role is starting to get to a point where that's why the UK is one of the most expensive places to build, because of the nature of the industry that we've evolved. But you can see a scenario where actually technology, AI, data will really slim down a lot of the need for those specialists, because a lot of them will be checking.
So in effect you're saying that previously there were less people involved, in like not just like less fragmentation, but just generally because it was not fragmented, less number of people would be involved in the process.
No, so if you'd gone back 50 years ago, you'd have fewer organisations, much more people.
Okay.
So fewer organisations, but lots more of big offices packed full of people drawing drawings, because it was all done manually. And then what evolved into a world of more organisations, but actually in all those organisations they need less people because technology has helped move them forward. So there's been a bit of a change in terms of more organisations, probably in overall terms less people, just because the drawing process is a lot more efficient now than it was.
And now it will be lesser organisation than less people.
Yes.
Because it will start getting more
Yeah.
consolidated.
Yeah, streamlined version of that with less people, even
Yeah.
less people.
Yeah, so you'll end up in a scenario where actually you need less parts of the jigsaw to get from blank piece of paper to finished product. Now, what and how and, you know, when that evolves, who knows? But it's a natural consequence of data-driven insights and data becoming more powerful. Also, generative design, in terms of, you know, as you know, generative design evolves more and more, and I'm sure I'm not an M&E engineer, but I'm sure there are parts of M&E that increasingly require less people to do calculations. A lot of it is, you know, done by algorithms and involved. So, you know, again, in that world, you've probably got a lot less people now than you would have had 20, 30 years ago. So therefore, part of the reason why we're focused on this is we hire graduates. Most graduates spend the first few years doing the basics, learning how to measure drawings, learning how to price things, learning how to do the stuff that you know, really underpins the kind of the credibility of you knowing what you're talking about, you knowing your trade. In 5 years' time, if AI and technology enables me to do that, why do I need to train graduates? Because technology is doing what they're doing. I still need more people because actually I'll be able to grow our business, we'll be able to influence more things, but they're coming in at that point where they have to be able to interpret data, drive insights straight away about things that they probably haven't had the benefit of going through 4 or 5 years of being out on site and understanding how that relates to a drawing relates to something they see on site. So people are going to enter the industry at a level where they haven't had the experience to get to that point, which is going to be really interesting because it's going to mean that one, that's probably a more interesting point to enter the industry, but how do you compensate for the fact they haven't had that experience? Now, technology, asking ChatGPT to give you the answer to that will be helpful, but our biggest concern is a little bit like the guy that I said has created this answer for us. When I sat down, he showed me, and it was brilliant. And he argued with me how his number was right, and got really fixated on the fact, how can it not be right? Well, it's just not right. How do you know that? You haven't gone through all of our systems, all of our data, all of that, but because it's wrong. But I've got that insight. So, but that will be a real thing in the future. People will look at outputs and they will have to validate and they will have to give confidence to the people that are going to use it. I think it's a really good thing. We just need to adapt ourselves as to how we respond to it.
I can imagine, in an architecture school, to do everything by hand. Now, in architecture school, people seldom touch pen and paper or something. Just start in CAD and they do everything in CAD. And I went through the phase, it was a transition phase, so we were forced to do for the first couple of years by hand, and you could not do any CAD work. So what I ended up doing is I would do it in CAD and trace it on.
So in a way you knew how to play the system to get the right answer.
So I was like, that is that transition, and now I can see and now if you go to young graduates, they think in 3 dimensions, they don't think in 2 dimensions, and no longer you can imagine that they are much more creative on the computer plane now than I am.
Yeah, and that's why historically you would sit down with an architect and they would sketch a drawing. They would literally get pens out and sketch out what this building could look like. Most people are doing that in SketchUp, which is a piece of software that pull it out. They're not going through reams and reams of paper or tracing paper to kind of, we'll change that, we'll change that.
So it's technology enabled.
Yeah, which again is a great thing. But it's about understanding, most industrial revolutions don't create less jobs than before them, they just create different jobs. And that's the bit that I think...
But your point is valid. Inside the big green rectangle there, you've got a lot of processing power that gives an individual more knowledge, but the client wants the application of the knowledge and not just the knowledge. But how do you, like you, I started from the bottom and worked my way up. How do you replace that on-the-job learning that gives you the ability to say, I know it said the answer's 42, but actually it's not 42, it's 60 because of your learned behaviour. I mean, how do you short-circuit that? It's a real challenge, isn't it, for the industry?
It is, yeah. I mean, I know most of our clients don't care about how we got to the answer. They want us to get to the answer. They want us to get to the answer quicker because time is money.
But that's because they've got you in the way, in between. Between the answer and telling them the answer.
But if we can get to that in a day instead of 2 weeks, that's real time that the project can move forward. So, and I think actually, again, from our point of view, what we will start to find, and we're seeing it already, that there are people developing generative designs linked to costed models. So there will be people, this isn't just going to affect us, there are developers that we're working with now who are coming to us with a design that's got an architectural building drawn and saying, can you validate the cost model that I've extracted from that?
So they're not asking you to do the cost model, they're asking you to validate the cost model because they already have been able to do those rough calculations.
Yeah, and some of it is pretty rough, but it won't take, once people start on the journey, it won't take very long for it to develop. But again, as I say, it doesn't worry me. It's just one of those things that we have to adapt to and evolve to. And I think kind of, that leads on to what we've always seen and what we've always found is, for people to develop and people to evolve, and it kind of, this slide sort of encapsulates a lot of what we talked about today, which is kind of I-shaped, historical role of I'm the best quantity surveyor in the world. Yeah. Well, that gets you to a point, because if I was really good, I'd probably never have met Ian, because I'd have stayed in my office measuring stuff all the time, doing stuff, and never built relationships and that human interaction with those clients that we were introduced to. So, T-shaped skills, which has been talked about a lot, is probably one of the things that, if I think about, Ian asked me earlier, what sets you apart? I was good at a lot of things. I probably wasn't amazing at any one of them. So I work with a lot of people who are technical.
You were good enough at all of them.
I was good enough at all of them, but I probably wasn't exceptional at any one of them. But then that's probably a consequence of I went from graduate to equity partner in 9 years. That meant that I moved through the paces really quickly. But I probably, in hindsight, didn't get enough depth of experience at each of those levels. But I was adept enough and had enough aptitude to be able to work it out as I went along. There are other people who are exceptionally, I employ some people who, on aspects of what we do, I wouldn't dream of going to ask anyone else, because they're exceptionally good at that part of it. But maybe they don't like dealing with clients. Maybe they don't like dealing with other aspects of the role that I'm more comfortable with. And that's the thing where, T-shaped skills is about having a broader breadth of experience and skill set in your locker to do. And what that will move on to is, we could see a role in the future where, and I'm already looking at schemes where we're saying, right, one person's going to be the cost and project manager. Instead of it being two disciplines, two people, I'm going to train one of our cost managers to do the project management bit, or vice versa, because actually they've got strength in expertise and technical knowledge in both, but our clients are challenging us around fees. I don't want to pay for two people. I want one person that can drive that and do it. And similarly, that could evolve to, the cone-shaped, where you could have a super designer who's a bit of an engineer, a bit of a structural engineer, a bit of an architect in the future, maybe even off the back of this loves a bit of QSing, and becomes multifaceted. I don't know. But I do think that's, this is something that will evolve, because again, probably linked more to where technology is going, in that as technology does a lot of the grunt work, it's going to be analysts and interpretation rather than actually doing the nuts and bolts of it.
Okay, thank you, Joe. That was very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. I wrote down a few questions. Anybody else got any other questions?
I was just wondering, my background is in sustainability. I'm studying sustainable resources here. How does that kind of interact with your role? Or is it kind of more, just because before in the introduction it said that you were kind of leading on that area?
Yeah, so sustainability is increasingly becoming more of a consideration for developers. I think it's fair to say historically people thought first about knocking a building down and then going again. Definitely we're seeing buildings that are being dismantled now, stored and think components are becoming part of the rebuild sequence. And it's, particularly in London, from a planning point of view, planners will much prefer a building that's reusing rather than knocking and starting again, to the point where there are some examples where planners have actively stopped planning permissions because they don't think a building should be knocked. The challenge is how you make sustainability work in a framework that's one, right for the building, and two, cost effective. So there's lots of things that are being looked at the moment in terms of how you actually, how you recycle glass, for example, how you recycle steel members out of a building and can reuse them as part of a new building. And again, we're increasingly being asked to look at, well, not just what the cost of a building is, but what's the carbon. So carbon assessments are becoming more and more relevant. We're about to start looking at a scheme at the moment where the client has already said that the government guidance around embodied carbon in buildings, they want to be 20% less than that, yet they want to build a bigger building than anyone's ever built before. So how do you unlock that challenge between people want to move towards sustainable buildings, but they've got the parameters of cost and deliverability that work with it?
So do you have as rich of a data for carbon, like cost, you understand suppliers, etc., but effectively similar calculation will be done for carbon, but the data behind how to kind of work with those numbers to meet the targets, that would be challenging, I would assume?
Ironically, in terms of raw data for carbon, there's probably a more robust data set out there for carbon. So there are lots of tools, things like OneClick, which is a piece of software that's pretty well known in the industry, that you can use it at the very front end to do generative design and looking at carbon as part of that. Or it's linked to very detailed carbon databases that will tell you the carbon content of a brick, windows, all of those granular things as you start to build it up, which is really interesting. We do a lot of what's called modern methods of construction, so off-site construction, whether it's 3D volumetric boxes or panelised systems that come together, so a lot less work on site, a lot more work in a factory. That's a really interesting part around sustainability and carbon, because some parts of that, if you assess it in a certain way, it's less sustainable, but when you look at it from a whole life point of view, could be more sustainable. So again, a lot of that is understanding what is the question that we're trying to answer.
How does, I think there was a law recently about biodiversity net gain in construction by 5%.
Yeah.
How does that kind of factor into the architectural side of it,
So biodiversity net gain has been a real challenge for lots of people, particularly what we've seen probably more so in the last 5 or 6 years than any other kind of generations before, is the amount of regulation that's come into construction has meant that people have bought sites without a consideration of what 5% biodiversity net gain is going to do to them. So they've suddenly gone from a job that was viable to unviable because they can't build in certain areas, or they need to protect certain things and need to do certain things around that. So part of that is there are schemes that just aren't going anywhere because people haven't unlocked a solution to resolve that requirement on a site. But again, it's something that we're having to take consideration of earlier and earlier in the process.
Why did you end up choosing QSing? You said you sort of glossed over that quickly.
Why? Well, I think so. As I said at the start, I started life on sites for my dad, and he was a ground worker who, I suppose, a little bit like he wanted his son to do slightly better than he did.
Yeah.
So in his world, he looked at all the people. So he was a ground worker looking at the main contractor and all of these people and cars turning up to site. He said, well, the guy that controls the money makes the decisions.
Right.
And the reality is, there are lots of things that we don't build stuff on site. But if we can't unlock the potential of a site by coming up with a viable solution,
then nobody does.
Then no one's building anything. So whilst we're not a creative designer, we've come up with lots of creative ways to get jobs to move forward and bring that. I suppose our creativity is coming up with. I can sit here and tell the architect and the engineer all day long that computer says no, calculator says no, doesn't work. But that doesn't move things forward.
Yeah.
If you sit there and say, right, you've drawn something that's beautiful, but it's never going to get built. So, and I can remember in architecture practice not that far from here, we started a 40-storey tower in Old Street, and the architects got up, one of the first meetings, walked us around all the schemes they had on their wall, and they showed us, got planning permission here, 50-storey tower, planning permission there, planning permission there, planning permission there, planning permission there. Right, okay. So, how many of those have ever been built? And they go, what? I said, how many of those? Well, this one's being built. Okay, but what about the other 20? I said, so I'm not being difficult, but you can get an amazing planning permission. But if it never gets built, all it is a beautiful picture on a wall. Equally, if we design a tower that's a square box that's horrific, it's not getting planning permission either. So it's about coming up with the compromise of, do you want the 26th job to actually get built, or have you just got space on the wall where you're kind of going to put another planning consent that never goes anywhere? That prompted an interesting debate, but we'll save that for another day. But again, for me, it's about not being afraid to have an honest conversation early in the process, because that ability, that binds people. It might create a little bit of tension, but again, one of the greatest phrases someone taught me early on was, it's about creating constructive tension. That, not everybody, the best, you can't make an omelette without cracking some eggs. You've got to put things together to get the best outcomes, and I think that's what certainly I've seen through my career. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? So let's assume that I'm director of estates at the Department for Education. So there is 67,000 schools in England, and they need to be decarbonized over the next 30 years. And Treasury is making all decisions. How would you do calculations which are actually 30 years ahead towards the end, considering all uncertainties, basically, which is happening with pricing, wars, geopolitics, and all this kind of stuff? So how would you calculate
as in financial
as in financial decision making? Yes.
Well, that's an easy one. I think, part of it is about, there's only so far you can predict into the future, but you have to come up with an educated process. So for me, it would be about, right, okay, what's the here and now? What are the bits that we can determine? Because, ultimately, what you're talking about is, if you assess that today, what do we think the implication of it would be? And then think about all the variables that could impact it, which, you could build a model that runs a sensitivity on it that says risk analysis, right, okay, thousands of scenarios, inflation goes up 3% year on year, or what if it goes up 5% year on year, or what if it changes? What about if different regulations come into play, or what if you can't get this material? There's lots of different variables that you could simulate a range of scenarios. But by doing that, you're going to say, if you ran 1,000 scenarios of what could happen, like any sensitivity analysis, you'll establish a range, won't you?
Yeah.
Which you can then use that to say, right, okay, well, we know it's going to be within that. How do we whittle that down to something that's an educated assessment based on a range of criteria and assumptions? So,
Is there any established protocols within the industry?
well, there's
experience based
that's why I think you'd start with a proof point of today,
today. Yeah.
because everyone can galvanise around that. Sensitivity analysis and risk theory around how you would model what could happen in the future. Again, there's some tried and tested models around that. You'd have to find the one that's most appropriate. But I think you have to ground it in something that people can understand, because otherwise, if I say, right, okay, I might as well just pluck it from my head as to what I think could happen in 30 years' time. You have to take people on that journey, otherwise they won't buy into it.
And another question from me. So you being CEO of organization, in terms of the training or the first degree of your staff, how many of them are building surveyors? How many of them are engineers? So what kind of?
So we've got, so by their primary training, I've never been trained to be the CEO, so I'm making it up as I go along. But there are that rounded skill set that certain people develop. Certain people are naturally good leaders, certain people are naturally good managers, certain people don't like managing people. We've got some people that don't like managing people, they like doing it themselves. So it takes all types. We've got lots of architects, lots of quantity surveyors, as you might imagine, but actually a lot of those people went to university and did geography degrees, history degrees, maths degrees, did completely different things. And what I would personally say, even though I'm somebody that went to university and did a QS degree, is some of our best people are people that have come from a different walk of life. So that, you know, we had a spate of geography students that became really good surveyors. I don't know why. Maybe it's because they're not, maybe because of the training they go through a geography degree makes them a bit more open-minded, or they can communicate better. Because one of the challenges with technical people as engineers and surveyors, they can be really bad at communicating. So, you know, work with lots of engineers who just can't deliver the message of what they're trying to get across, which therefore makes it, you know, you can come up with the best idea in the world, but if you can't take everybody with you on that journey, the chances of that moving forward are pretty slim. So yeah, I think the world has adapted quite a lot, where historically you would have gone in at the bottom, trained and come the way up. I think now we live in a world where businesses are a lot more open to retraining, and as I say, from our experience, we've seen real benefits of that.
One final one from me. Have you enjoyed your career? Because it's quite often, it's quite difficult sometimes to hear a talk like this and understand whether you hate your job or you really love it. And then the second thing, which is linked to that, is are you optimistic for the future of the industry, which of course all the people in this room will be joining?
Yeah, it's pretty deep for us to finish.
If you could finish that in 30 seconds, Joe.
So, have I enjoyed my career? I've loved my career. Going back to the coffees we have with people when they join, I made a lot of mistakes along the way. That's part of learning. I wouldn't necessarily change any of the major roles that we've done. I've worked with some great people. I've worked on some amazing projects. One of the reasons why I wanted to get into the industry was I like physically seeing the output of your labours. So I probably bore my kids with going around London and driving along, but we built that. We're working on that. But it does. I think, you know, people that work in the built environment, if you don't love buildings, you're in the wrong industry. Because, you know, it's the same as an artist, it's the same as, you know, everyone plays a slightly different role in it, but seeing kind of what is a 6-year journey for 2 or 3 years, stuff on a drawing turn into a reality, you know, that's the bit that gets me up in the morning. Unfortunately, as you get further on in your career, you get less time on sites and seeing that come to life, but actually, what I've enjoyed more from my time at Cast was seeing my people deliver projects and having the opportunity to go along to some of those jobs that I've had. I might have, you know, the perfect scenario for me on a job is I've set it up really well and I don't get any any calls along the way, and I get invited to go and see, to get involved in the contract side of things and to get involved in seeing the finished product. Why is that really good for me? Because that means that the team that we've trained have done a really good job. You know, generally as kind of someone at CEO or senior management, you either get involved if it's going really well or really badly, and sadly it's often more when it's going really badly. But you know, for me, I've really enjoyed my career. You know, do I hold out the hope for the future? So over the summer, my son, who's 16, came in to do some work experience for us, and I was really kind of toying with, you know, is this an industry that I'd want my son to be part of? And I started off that kind of mental journey a little bit going, the industry's changed, it's a completely different place to the place that I kind of loved my first 10 years in the industry, of meeting lots of people, going out a lot, you know, meeting some friends that I've, you know, had for 25 years and will probably have for another 25 years. That part of the industry isn't there anymore. It's a different culture. COVID's changed a lot of things as well. But actually, I'm comparing to a world that was a completely different world anyways. Now, my son probably does want to do a lot of those things. But then equally, I look at the people that join our industry now, and our business is probably 30-40% of our business are under 25, and they love it. They love the interaction, they're very inquisitive, they run towards an industry that they find really interesting. And I think that the industry is only going to get more interesting. So, you know, for me, I think it's a great time to be joining an industry, but it's an industry that's going to go through a lot of change in the next 10 to 15 years, which is going to be really good for people that want to adapt and change. I think actually for people joining the industry now, it's going to be easier for them than maybe people that joined 5 to 10 years ago, because what's going to happen is the pace of change is going to get quicker. Certain people that didn't see it coming won't adapt and won't evolve, and therefore probably will find themselves quite isolated, or probably end up doing less rewarding roles in the industry. Whereas I think people that join now with an inquisitive mind that are on the cusp of what's going to be a really interesting journey should have really interesting and rewarding careers.
Good answer. Right, I think we're done.
Thank you very much.
Joe.